imagine? Unbelievable, unbelievable. It's been just an awesome day and an awesome little first bit here with my great partner, and we're having a lot of fun.
She was the tough-talking girl from the Bronx who stole every scene on The Facts of Life. But somewhere between the 80s spotlight and today, Nancy McKeon vanished from the headlines almost entirely. And fans want to know why. Was it heartbreak, Hollywood burnout, or something she was hiding on purpose? Buckle up, because Jo Polniaczek's real story is messier, quieter, and far more interesting than anyone expected. The girl who cried on cue. Before she was a household name, Nancy McKeon was just a toddler modeling baby clothes for the Sears catalog. Born on April 4, 1966, in Westbury, New York, to a travel agent, father, and a mother who clearly knew star power when she saw it, Nancy was destined for the camera almost from birth. But here's the twist nobody talks about. Nancy didn't get discovered because she was the prettiest kid in the room. She got discovered because she could cry on command. A casting director spotted her in a Hallmark commercial where she turned on the waterworks like a seasoned professional, and that single moment changed the trajectory of her entire life. By 1979, she was already bouncing around soap operas like The Secret Storm and Another World. For a while, the family actually lived in Forest Hills, Queens, a neighborhood so meaningful to Nancy that she would later name her own production company after it. She wasn't a typical Hollywood kid raised on a studio lot in California. She was a New York girl who happened to fall into show business. Then, in the fall of 1980, during the second season of a struggling NBC sitcom called The Facts of Life, the network made a brutal decision. They fired 4 of the original cast members. Into that chaos walked a scrappy, street-smart new girl named Jo Polniaczek, played by a 14-year-old Nancy McKeon. She wasn't supposed to be the breakout star, but that tomboy energy, that Bronx attitude, that leather jacket swagger, audiences ate it up. While she filmed the series, Nancy was tutored right there on set, having previously attended Catholic school before television took over her education entirely. In one interview years later, she joked that she still managed to get detention a few times on set, mostly for refusing to give up her favorite patent leather shoes in favor of whatever the strict on-set schooling rules demanded. But what kept Jo from becoming a one-note tough girl was the vulnerability Nancy folded into every performance. Underneath the attitude was a character who clearly cared, who got hurt, who softened around the people she trusted. And that contrast is what turned a mid-season cast replacement into the emotional center of the entire show. Nancy's chemistry with her castmates only strengthened that shift, helping The Facts of Life recover from its rocky cast overhaul and settle into the ensemble fans still remember fondly today. Beyond Jo Polniaczek, Nancy quietly picked up other work most fans have completely forgotten. She lent her voice to several characters on the ABC Weekend Special cartoon block, including a character named Scruffy, proof that even as a teenager, she was already juggling multiple corners of the entertainment industry at once. So what happened once the cameras stopped rolling and the show ended its historic run? Did Nancy ride that fame into a smooth, glittering career? Or did things get complicated fast? The roles that got away. Here's where things get juicy. Nancy McKeon wasn't just a sitcom kid who faded into obscurity. She was in the room for some of the biggest roles in 90s television, and she walked away with none of them. In 1990, NBC executives wanted her for the title role in a sitcom adaptation of the film Working Girl. That part eventually went to a then completely unknown actress named Sandra Bullock. Let that sink in. Nancy McKeon was on the shortlist before Sandra Bullock became, well, Sandra Bullock. It gets crazier. In 1994, Nancy actually auditioned for the role of Monica Geller on a little show called Friends. The part went to Courtney Cox instead, and the rest is sitcom history. Can you imagine an alternate universe where Nancy McKeon, not Courtney Cox, was obsessively cleaning that apartment for 10 seasons? Think about that. 2 auditions, 2 roles that changed television history. Had either gone differently, Nancy might have spent another decade as one of television's biggest stars. That's how quickly Hollywood careers can change. One casting decision can send two actors down completely different paths. Instead of chasing those near misses, Nancy pivoted. She got her own sitcom in 1995 called Can't Hurry Love, but it barely lasted one season before cancellation. Rather than sulk, she went behind the camera, producing television movies through her own company, Forest Hills Entertainment, named after the Queens neighborhood where she grew up. By 1999, she had written and directed her own short film, taking full creative control instead of waiting around for casting directors to hand her the next big break. Throughout the 80s and 90s, she also built up a quiet but steady resume of television movies, tackling far heavier material than anything the facts of life ever allowed. She portrayed real-life domestic violence survivor Tracy Thurman in A Cry for Help. The Tracy Thurman story took on the role of a woman wrongly accused of murdering her boss in The Wrong Woman, and portrayed a woman living with schizophrenia in Strange Voices. These weren't glamorous, tabloid-friendly projects. They were the kind of serious, issue-driven roles that proved she wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, not just remembered as a sitcom kid. So if the golden roles kept slipping away, what convinced Nancy to keep grinding instead of disappearing completely? And more importantly, what was going on in her personal life while all of this professional chess was being played? The private romance Hollywood never got to exploit. This is the part of Nancy McKeon's story that tabloids have always been desperate to crack open, and she has never given them the satisfaction. In 1995, while filming the Hallmark movie A Mother's Gift, Nancy met a film technician named Mark Andrus. He wasn't an actor. He wasn't chasing fame. He worked behind the scenes on productions like Escape from L.A., Arlington Road, and later The Day After Tomorrow, a guy who understood the industry without ever wanting to be part of its spotlight. They dated for 8 years. 8 years with barely a whisper of tabloid coverage. No dramatic public breakups, no staged photo ops, nothing. Then, in June of 2003, they got married in a wedding so small and so private that only 20 guests were invited. 20. For a former 80s television icon, that's almost unheard of. The couple went on to have 2 daughters, reportedly named Aurora and Harlow. And according to multiple entertainment outlets, Nancy and Mark built a life deliberately outside the Hollywood machine, prioritizing a grounded, low-key existence over red carpets and constant publicity. Details about Mark himself remain remarkably scarce for someone married to a former household name actress. His IMDb biography notes he grew up in Texas and worked as a technician on notable productions. But beyond his professional credits, he has avoided nearly every spotlight opportunity that comes attached to being a celebrity's spouse. No tell-all interviews, no reality show cameos, and almost no attempts to capitalize on his wife's fame. Some entertainment outlets have reported the family relocated toward Texas following the wedding, favoring a slower pace of life over the constant churn of Los Angeles industry events. It's not hard to understand why privacy became such a non-negotiable value for Nancy specifically. She had spent her entire adolescence tutored on a soundstage, filming in front of a live studio audience, with cameras documenting nearly every visible milestone of her teenage years. That's not a normal adolescence by any measure, and she came of age at a time when the entertainment industry offered young stars very little protection from the pressures of constant visibility. She also grew up watching plenty of Hollywood marriages and high-profile relationships collapse in full public view, playing out across tabloids for entertainment rather than staying private. Choosing a small wedding, a low-profile husband, and a life largely shielded from cameras wasn't just a personal preference. It reads like a deliberate correction, built by someone who understood exactly what she didn't want to repeat. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. So why would someone who spent her entire childhood and young adulthood as a famous face suddenly decide to disappear from the public eye the moment she had control over her own narrative? And could this be the exact reason fans are so shocked by what she looks like and what she's doing today? Where did she actually go? While Nancy McKeon wasn't dominating magazine covers anymore, she absolutely did not stop working. She just stopped chasing headlines. From 2001 to 2004, she starred as Inspector Ginny Eckstead on the Lifetime police drama The Division. And in a move that blurred the line between fiction and reality, the show's writers actually incorporated her real-life pregnancy directly into the storyline during its final season. Running 4 seasons, The Division gave Nancy something the facts of life never could: proof that she could anchor a serious ensemble drama, not just a sitcom built around comedic timing. It became her longest-running television role after Jo Polniaczek, and Lifetime viewers embraced her as a grounded, believable lead in a genre far removed from the boarding school antics that made her famous. For an actress who spent her childhood being underestimated as just a comedic sitcom kid, leading a gritty police procedural for 4 straight years was its own quiet vindication. Then, from 2009 to 2010, she popped up in a recurring role on the Disney Channel series Sunny with a Chance, playing the mother of Demi Lovato's character. An entire generation of kids who had no idea who Jo Polniaczek was grew up watching Nancy McKeon without even realizing they were looking at an 80s legend. In 2018, she resurfaced in an unexpected way, competing on Dancing with the Stars during its 27th season, paired with 2-time Mirrorball champion Val Chmerkovskiy. Fans who hadn't seen her in years were thrilled just to watch her step back into a fully public, unscripted spotlight. And McKeon herself seemed genuinely moved by the pairing, calling Chmerkovskiy the most amazing partner she could have asked for. She was eliminated in week 3 of the competition, ultimately placing 11th out of the season's full cast. An early exit, but one she reportedly took in stride, happy to have gotten the experience at all, rather than treating it as a must-win moment. For a woman who had spent decades avoiding the spotlight, simply being back in it, cameras and all, seemed to be the real reward. But here's the real bombshell that fans are only just catching up to. The play Pen Pals, written by Michael Griffo and directed by Suzanne Barabas, actually got its world premiere at New Jersey Repertory Theater before making the leap off-Broadway, with Nancy making her stage debut in the production. In an interview tied to the production, she reminisced about how her Facts of Life days had also been filmed in front of a live studio audience, drawing a direct line between the nervous energy of live sitcom tapings decades earlier and the thrill of theater with absolutely no safety net. She reportedly shared on social media that it had taken over 50 years to finally check this particular bucket list dream off her list, calling it a joy to share the milestone with fans. So if she's been quietly working this entire time, why does it feel like the internet only just remembered she exists? And what does she actually look like now, after 4 decades away from Eastland School? The 60th birthday that broke the internet. On April 4th this year, Nancy McKeon turned 60 years old, and suddenly, her name was everywhere again. Fellow 80s sitcom star Carrie Michelson, who appeared on Gimme a Break, posted a nostalgic birthday tribute on social media, complete with throwback photos of the two of them hanging out alongside other icons of the era, including Family Ties actress Justine Bateman. But it wasn't just the tribute that got people talking, it was the photos of Nancy herself. Entertainment outlets covering her birthday specifically pointed to her appearance at the opening night after-party for Pen Pals at New York's West Bank Cafe at the tail end of 2024, describing her as looking remarkably similar to her days playing Jo at Eastland School decades earlier. Commenters flooded in, stunned that a woman entering her 7th decade could look so close to the tomboy troublemaker they remembered from Saturday morning reruns. The phrase, aging with grace, got thrown around in headline after headline, and honestly, looking at the photos, it's hard to argue. And she isn't the only one from that iconic cast still thriving. Lisa Whelchel, who played the snooty Blair Warner, is reportedly enjoying life as a grandmother. Kim Fields, forever remembered as Tootie, has stayed visibly youthful and now leads a weekly wellness gathering she calls Refresh. Sadly, Charlotte Rae, who played the beloved house mother Mrs. Garrett, passed away back in 2018, a loss that still stings for fans of the original cast. And Mindy Cohn, who played the endlessly lovable Natalie, has continued acting as well, with reports placing her alongside comedy legend Carol Burnett in more recent projects. What's striking is how differently each woman chose to handle the back half of her life after such an intense, formative burst of childhood fame. Some leaned into grandmotherhood, some into wellness culture, and Nancy, by most accounts, leaned into privacy, theater, and motherhood in roughly equal measure. So, with her former castmates scattered across grandmotherhood, wellness influencing, and quiet retirement, where does that leave Nancy? Is she done chasing the spotlight for good? Or is this 60th birthday moment just the beginning of a fresh chapter? The woman behind the curtain. What makes Nancy McKeon's story so compelling isn't scandal. It's the complete absence of one. There's no messy public divorce, no rehab headlines, no decades-long feud with a former castmate playing out on talk shows. Instead, there's a woman who built a home life so private that even entertainment reporters admit they know very little about her husband beyond his job title and a handful of film credits. Reports describe Mark Andrus as someone who deliberately avoids interviews and social media, letting Nancy be the public face of the family while he manages the grounded, everyday responsibilities of parenting away from cameras. It's a dynamic that seems almost intentionally designed to protect their two daughters from ever experiencing the kind of relentless scrutiny Nancy herself grew up under as a child star. And that might be the biggest reveal of all. Nancy McKeon spent her entire adolescence performing in front of millions of people, tutored on set between takes, quite literally growing up inside a television studio. Every choice she has made since, the quiet marriage, the tiny guest list, the pivot toward producing and directing, the decades-long gap between major tabloid moments, looks less like someone running from fame and more like someone who understood exactly what fame costs and decided her children wouldn't pay that price. It also explains why her occasional public reappearances feel so different from typical celebrity comebacks. There's no desperation in a Dancing with the Stars run 17 years after her show ended. No obvious grab for relevance in stepping onto an off-Broadway stage nearly 50 years into her career. Each move reads instead like someone checking items off a genuinely personal list, on a genuinely personal timeline, entirely unconcerned with whether it trends online. So was Nancy McKeon's retreat from the spotlight a sacrifice, or was it the smartest career move she ever made? The comparison everyone makes. It's impossible to talk about Nancy McKeon at 60 without comparing her path to the other kind of child star story, the cautionary tale. For every actor who grew up on a hit show and quietly built a stable adult life, there are a dozen headlines about former child stars who spiraled into public meltdowns, financial ruin, or tabloid-fueled scandal. Nancy's story simply refuses to fit that mold, and that refusal is precisely what makes her so fascinating to revisit now. There was no lawsuit against her network, no headline-grabbing arrest, no decades-long public feud with a former Facts of Life co-star playing out across daytime talk shows. Instead, there's a woman who took the unusual step of using her fame as leverage to build something quieter, a production company, a directing credit, a stable marriage, 2 kids largely shielded from the cameras that once followed her everywhere. Even her career choices reflect that same instinct toward control. Rather than waiting for Hollywood to keep offering her parts, she frequently created her own opportunities behind the camera. Something remarkably rare for an actress who first became famous as a teenager in an industry not exactly known for handing creative control to its young stars. And that brings us back to the 60th birthday moment that reignited all this curiosity in the first place. Fans weren't just celebrating how she looked, They were responding to how content she seemed. After decades away from the spotlight, Nancy appeared comfortable living life entirely on her own terms. Just a 60-year-old woman at an off-Broadway after-party, standing next to old friends, looking remarkably like the girl audiences fell in love with more than 4 decades earlier. At 60, Nancy McKeon isn't chasing comebacks or clinging to the 80s. She's writing, producing, occasionally stepping on stage, and raising a family largely out of the public eye, on her own terms. Jo Polniaczek may have been the character that made her famous, but the real Nancy McKeon built something even rarer in Hollywood, a life she actually controls. If this deep dive into her journey surprised you, smash that like button, subscribe for more untold celebrity stories, and drop a comment telling us which facts of life star you want us to investigate next.